So last night, as part of my daily photo a day for the rest of my days thing, I ducked into the city to get a bit of a photo. So what I've got here are a couple of different pictures that I've taken straight from the camera. Now, I'm using Adobe Lightroom, which is a really great tool for editing pictures. And this is kind of the picture I decided I wanted to settle on. You've got the Rialto here, you've got some light trails from cars passed by, and as I scroll through my little library here, you can see I've actually got a ton of photos of pretty much the same thing. What I really wanted when I captured the photo was these light trails from the cars. And one of the techniques that I'll be using is layering up all these different images and basically adding all the variances of light. So we've got some light over here from this car. When we come back to this photo here, we've got lights from the tail lights passing by. And so I've got about 6 or 8 different images of various light sources with cars passing by. But stepping back to the first shot, I actually took this photo with the intention of doing the old HDR, which is high dynamic range type treatment. So this picture here is the correctly exposed picture. This picture here is a little bit underexposed, 2 stops to be specific, and this picture here is 2 stops over. So here you've got so much detail in the shadows, and then when you go to the underexposed area, you've got absolute kind of detail in the highlight areas. So we can zoom in here, and you've got this pillar, which you can see all the texture on. Whereas when you go to the overexposed shot, it's just blown out. Now the cool thing about HDR, which I'm going to apply to these 3 photos, is it allows you to bring the highlights, the shadows from a range of shots, and I'm going to do that using a tool called HDR Pro. So these 3 photos, bang, 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 will get loaded up into the Nik collection piece of software called HDR Pro. So the first thing it asks me to do is if I want to do some ghosting or treatments to give it some preliminary work for when it comes to loading the presets or the configurations. So this here allows me to give a quick look and make sure that I'm happy with what I see. Now I'm not going to play with alignment or ghost reduction. I used my tripod for this photo, which is critical for low light, long exposure shots at night. And I'm just going to go create HDR. Now what this does is it loads the 3 different images and gives me the ability to either load a whole bunch of different presets or for me to control these presets and tweak it myself. So starting off, we've got default, balanced, deep. These are all names, the presets that came from HDR Pro, which is part of the Nik collection, which Google actually now own. And these presets are pretty cool. Some of them I don't like. I don't like that at all. When I have a look at dark, I think that's just a bit overdone. You got some black and white settings. I'm not a big fan of doing black and white in HDR Pro. I prefer to do that in Lightroom. Structured kind of makes a lot of contrast between the whites and the darks. We've got structurized, sorry, not structured, structurized too, and that's just too far gone in my opinion. And as we scroll down, there's a whole bunch of different settings. Dramatic, for example, is just over the top. Now, I'm going to go to custom because I've usually got a couple of different type of settings. So I got, here we go, Natty. I don't know why I call it that. But Natty is kind of a preset that I use quite a bit. You know, it really pulls out the reflection of the Rialto in the building here on the left. And as we have a look around, I'm pretty happy with most of this. Now, just in terms of the sliders in Nik collection in HDR Pro, right now I'm on strong with the HDR method. I can drag the depth down to normal, subtle, or off. Pretty happy with it as strong, although it is a bit dark. So really, it really depends on the type of photo that you've got. Might just leave it as normal. That looks fine to me. So I'm not going to do a lot of work with this here. I'm just going to pretty much keep it simple and go safe. So this will now dump this saved picture, which comes from HDR Pro, back into my Lightroom library. So I'm just going to go to all photos, and here we go. This is the picture that has been created. It's called a TIFF. The previous pictures that we had were ARWs. They're straight from the raw file from the camera that I used, my little Sony. And those 3 pictures have been assembled to make this one picture. But what I missed out on whilst taking this photo, or the 3 photos which have been merged to one, is all the light trails from the cars that passed by. There wasn't a lot of traffic. So what I did was I actually took a whole bunch of different photos, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. And you can see they've got different light trails that pass by. Now I'm going to select all these different pictures of the one exposed scene, and I've selected them all. Now I've got this develop little module up the top here, and in here I've got auto sync selected. So when I make a change to one picture, if I turn the exposure down, for example, stupidly dark, you can see those thumbnails have all been updated with stupidly dark. Now it means that whatever settings I apply, they will get auto synced to all the images that I've selected. So I'll just double tap back on exposure and that resets it back to 0. And here I'm going to do some basic treatments of highlights and shadows. So I'm going to turn down the highlights, and you can see the slider kind of takes over where the light areas are. And then I've got the shadows. Now I don't need to do too much with this because I am really only looking for the trails from the car. One thing I will play with is the clarity setting, and that kind of increases the contrast between the lights and the darks, but it does it in a bit of a grainy, kind of gritty manner as opposed to contrast. So if I drag this up, it just adds a nice level of contrast. And I'm just going to pump up the vibrance and saturation a bit because I'm a bit of a fan of oversaturated stuff. So here we've got the tram going through. Now if I just press on one of these other pictures, we've got a car going through. You can see the tail lights, you can see the headlights from these cars. So the next step I'm going to do, which is where the magic really comes together, is I'm going to right click or control click on those images, and I'm going to go edit in open as layers in Photoshop. And what this will do is this will grab each of these images and it'll pop them on top of each other in Photoshop, meaning that I can then do a real simple technique that basically stacks all the images over each other and adds the light from one source to the other. So this is grabbing each of those modified images, and there we go, bang, 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 bang. Sometimes this can be a bit slow. Just, I mean, to put it in context, each one of these images is 24 megapixels, or about 25 to 28 meg as a flat file. And then when we chuck them into Photoshop, we're converting them to TIFFs, and TIFFs are a lot more heavy, I suppose heavy duty. They're a much heavier file size, and as we can see down the bottom here in Photoshop, it's taking up more and more space. So we're at 1.3 gig of memory just to load these images in. So I think it's now done. I'm just going to drag my layers window up, and we can see here we've got 1, 2, 3, and so on layers. There's quite a few. Now, as much as I did take this on the tripod, one of the things that will inevitably happen is I'll press the camera trigger and the tripod will move. So the first thing I'm going to do is select all the layers. So I just click on the top one, hold down Shift, click on the bottom one, and then I go to align every single image based on the previous image in the layer. So this is really cool. It's great for panoramic images, but equally it's great for a bit of camera movement when you take a picture. So auto align layer in Photoshop under edit will look at every single picture. And I'll just leave this as auto, I don't need to do any work here. It'll look at every single picture and it'll look for the contrasty bits, so the corners, the lines, the whatever it can find, and it'll say, right, here's a point of reference. I'm going to get this point of reference with the image below and align that, and then I'm going to get the image below and align that. And the real cool thing about what this process does is it will dramatically skew and stretch and distort where required to really allow you to assemble a whole bunch of different layers as one, which means you can do all sorts of crazy things like extreme panoramas, or you can get the the 3D, or the if you want to do a panorama in a 3D image, then you can use this kind of tech. So this will generate a panorama. There's my cat meowing, because that's what he does when I'm on my computer. Flexo, cut it out. So now you can see there's a little bit of white space around here. That's because it's had to shift a few different images. Now, if I turn off one layer and the other and the other, you can see the main elements, like the Rialto Tower here, they're in the exact same spot. So all we've got between these guys is the difference of the light trails, which is what I really care about. So in each of these layers, I've got them selected. This one object, or this one layer mode that I'm going to change, is to lighten, and this will grab any bits that have light and literally let them pass through to the previous layer. So if I do this, all of a sudden I've got all the light trails from every single layer that was in there previously. The dark areas stay the same. Just for argument's sake, if I switch this to darken, it makes the light trails disappear. So you can choose these different layer modes, and you can choose to say, right, I want the dark bits, I want the light bits. I want the light bits in this one. So now we've got a different image entirely to darken, and that's what I'm happy with. So that's pretty cool, pretty simple, and I've got these areas here that I like. Now I'm going to go back to Lightroom, and I'm going to grab my HDR output, which is this crazy guy, and I'm going to go edit this one. So control click or edit click, right click if you're on a PC, and go edit in Adobe Photoshop. Hey Flexo, you want to sit on my lap? So I'm going to edit the copy with Lightroom adjustments. Bada boom, bada bing. This picture here, all taken from the same location. I'm just going to go select A, or select all, which is Control A or Command A. Copy, that's Command C or Control C. And then I'm going to paste this image over the top of this layer. So now I've got my HDR picture, which has the detail in the shadows and the cool kind of sky. And it's over the top of all these pictures. Now, if I just change this to lighten, kind of does the job. And it's added all those lighting areas just the way I'd like it. There's a little bit of movement in the trees, and that's okay because there was wind and time passes and you get those kind of motion blurs. But that's pretty much the picture as I like. So now I'm going to save that, and that image from Photoshop will be loaded back into Lightroom. And saving down the bottom there, you can see it's done. I'm going to close this. I'm going to close this one as well because I'm done with this. Don't need to save that. And I'll quit Photoshop. So now I've got these different images, these individuals taken with the light trails, laid up in Photoshop. I've merged them with this HDR image, which doesn't contain many light trails. And the final output is this one big image that's made up of about 14 different images. Hey Flexo, you want to be lap cat? So, lastly, I can make some tweaks in here. I could choose to bump down the exposure. I'm pretty happy with it. I can choose to turn down the highlights. Again, I've kind of done that, so I'm pretty happy with the way most of this image works. Can add a bit more contrast by turning down the blacks or increasing the whites. Clarity settings, can play with them if I like, but I'm pretty happy with this image. So then it's just about really cropping those little areas around the edge. Now I'm just going to drag on this handle. Here's a little trick. If you hold down Control and Alt, or Command, Alt and Shift on a Mac, you'll grab your anchor points on both the top and the bottom, and it maintains everything in proportion. So just say I do this, and hit enter, now I've got an image that's completely different. I don't want that. I'm just going to go crop, get rid of the minor border because I like the frame that I've got here. Hit enter, might straighten it up a little bit because the Rialto feels a little bit off. But I'm mindful that we've got these poles on the left-hand side. So I'm pretty cool with that. I like this horizontal line here. That really kind of gives a frame of reference between the sections on the bridge. Hit enter, press F for full screen, and that's pretty much the picture that I've created in, what, about 10 or so minutes. And that's pretty typical of a normal workflow when it comes to making an image. Some images are a lot harder, some images take a lot longer, but this one was pretty simple, and that's about it. So I hope that's been interesting, and feel free to ask any questions if you want to know any more. Thanks.